On a cracked sidewalk outside Mercy General Hospital, a 7-year-old girl was selling crayon drawings for $1 each. Her mother's life-saving surgery was $300,000 away, and from a 6th-floor window, a reclusive billionaire was watching her, counting the days she'd be there, and drafting a plan that would alter their futures forever. This is Ava, a second grader whose entire world had collapsed into medical bills and fear. And the man watching was Julian Thorne, a tech mogul recovering from heart surgery who hadn't spoken to his own daughter in 7 years. One was fighting for a future. The other was questioning his past, and their collision would expose a shocking truth about the hospital where they both now lived. Every morning for 2 weeks, as doctors made their rounds inside Mercy General, 7-year-old Ava Martinez followed her own relentless routine. She would arrive on the sidewalk at 9 a.m., her small wagon loaded with supplies, a foldable stool, a cardboard box for donations, and her inventory, 32 original crayon drawings, each carefully priced at $1. She had made them in the waiting room over the prior month, scenes of sunflowers, smiling cats, and a big greenhouse with 4 windows, which was her old home before the bad news came. Her mother, Alina, had been a home health aide for 10 years. She was the sole provider until a chronic heart condition, initially misdiagnosed as anxiety, progressed to heart failure. The required surgery was a ventricular assist device implantation, a procedure costing $300,000. Their insurance, through Alina's agency, denied it as experimental for her specific stage of illness. An appeal was filed, then lost in a maze of paperwork. With no income and savings evaporating, they faced a countdown. So Ava, who had learned to read medical bills before chapter books, devised a plan. If she sold one drawing every 10 minutes for 8 hours a day, she could make $48. In 6,250 days, she would have the money. She was 7. She believed in the math. From his private suite on the 6th floor, Julian Thorne watched this equation unfold through double-paned glass. At 62, he was worth $4.3 billion, most of it from the data analytics firm he'd sold 3 years prior. His recovery from elective heart surgery was medically perfect, yet he was drowning in a different kind of silence. The suite was spacious, quiet, and empty. No family photos sat on the bedside table. His ex-wife had been notified of the procedure by his attorney. His daughter, Sophia, now 28, had not returned his last 7 calls. His isolation was a fortress of his own design, built during decades of prioritizing acquisition over connection. He came to Mercy General not just for its renowned cardiac unit, but because its chief of surgery sat on the board of a company Julian still controlled. His presence here was a transaction, like everything else. But the view from his window had become an unexpected, persistent disruption. A spot of defiant color on the gray concrete, a small figure of incomprehensible resolve. He found himself tracking her progress, the way she'd patiently explain a drawing to a hurried nurse, the way her shoulders would sag just a fraction at 5 p.m. when she packed up, the donation box conspicuously light. He began to keep a mental tally. Over 14 days, he estimated she'd made no more than $200. At that rate, her mother would be dead 10 times over before she reached her goal. The absurd, brutal arithmetic of it scraped against something long buried within him. Downstairs, Alina Martinez fought a quieter battle. Confined to a shared room on the 3rd floor, she conserved every ounce of energy, directing it toward staying alive for one more day. The guilt was a heavier weight than her illness. She knew Ava was outside. The nurses, with kindness in their eyes and helplessness in their hands, would sometimes mention seeing her. Alina had forbidden it, of course. She told Ava it was too cold, too dangerous. But Ava had looked at her with those fierce, dark eyes and said, "I have to help, Mama. It's my job, too." How do you argue with a love that concrete? So Alina lay there, listening to the beep of her own heart monitor, a sound that now had a dollar sign attached to it, and prayed for a miracle she no longer fully believed in. Julian's world was one of leverage, data, and decisive action. This child's endeavor was the antithesis of all that, A wildly inefficient system based on pure hope. It should have been easy to dismiss. Yet he couldn't. It was the specificity that got him. The meticulous way she taped each drawing to the front of her stand. The little sign lettered in marker, "Art for Mama's Heart." $1, $1 not 10, not 5, 1. It was the only number she felt people could spare. He thought of his daughter at that age, of the elaborate lemonade stand he'd funded but never visited, busy closing a deal in another time zone. The memory arrived not as nostalgia, but as a sharp clinical diagnosis of a failure. On the 15th morning, something in his own monitored heart shifted. It wasn't a medical event. It was a decision. He pressed the call button for his private nurse, not for medication, but for a request. When his personal assistant, Maya, arrived an hour later for her daily briefing, Julian didn't ask for market reports. He pointed out the window. "See that girl? I want you to go down there, buy every drawing she has, and then find out everything about her situation, who her mother is, what the exact medical and financial blockage is. Everything." Maya, accustomed to unusual directives, simply nodded. "And if she asks why?" Julian watched as Ava straightened a picture of a lopsided, radiant sun. "Tell her," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "It's an investment." As Maya turned to leave, he added one final, quiet command. "And do not tell her who I am." The investigation was set in motion. But what Maya would uncover in the hospital's own records within the hour was not just a story of hard luck. It was a pattern of negligence, a denied claim linked to a procedural error the hospital had buried. Ava's mother wasn't just fighting an insurance company. She was fighting the very institution that was keeping her alive. And Julian Thorne, the man who owned a significant piece of that institution, was now funding the discovery of its betrayal. Maya's inquiry, backed by the implicit authority of a billionaire's office, moved through hospital administration like a surgical laser. She didn't ask for favors. She requested audits. Within 3 hours, she had the full patient file for Elena Martinez. Within 4, she had the internal correspondence from the hospital's billing department to the insurance carrier. And by 5 p.m., she was standing in Julian's suite, holding a single sheet of paper that summarized a catastrophic failure. The denial was not based on the procedure's experimental nature. That was the public reason. The real, buried reason was a coding error. A hospital clerk had entered an incorrect diagnostic code for Elena's stage of heart failure, a code that, under the insurer's strict protocol, did trigger an automatic denial for the advanced surgery she needed. The mistake was caught internally 3 weeks later. An email chain showed a mid-level manager flagging it to his superior, writing, "Need to file a correction with insurer to reprocess. This is life or death." The superior's reply, sent 14 minutes later, was 2 words: cost prohibitive. Correcting the error would have forced the hospital to reprocess hundreds of other claims from that period, incurring audit risks and administrative penalties estimated at over $200,000. It was cheaper in their calculus to let the denial stand. Elena Martinez was not a patient. She was a line item. Julian read the email printout in silence. The monitor beside his bed beeped steadily, a stark counterpoint to the quiet rage building in his chest. He owned 18% of the parent corporation that managed Mercy General. His signature was on the board directives that emphasized operational efficiency. The cold, brutal logic on that page was a dialect of a language he himself had helped institutionalize. He had built his fortune on optimizing systems, removing friction and maximizing yield. Now he was seeing the human residue of that philosophy, concentrated in the hopeful face of a child selling drawings outside his window. "How much time does she have?" he asked, his voice flat. "Without the surgery, her cardiologist's notes estimate 3 to 5 months before total heart failure," Maya replied. "The hospital is aware. The head of the department is copied on the email where the correction was rejected." Julian set the paper down. He looked out the window. Ava was packing up for the day, carefully placing her unsold drawings back into her wagon. $23, he guessed. Maybe 24. "Transfer $300,000 from the discretionary fund to a new account," he said. "No, Make it 500,000. Designate it for all medical and living expenses for Alina and Ava Martinez. Do it anonymously. Route it through a medical trust so the hospital can't intercept it. Maya nodded, typing on her tablet. And the hospital? Julian's gaze remained fixed on the sidewalk. Schedule a meeting with Gerald Whitmore tomorrow morning. Tell him I'm reviewing my investment. The following day, Julian Thorne, in a tailored sweater over his hospital gown, sat across from Mercy General's administrator. The atmosphere was not of a patient and caregiver, but of a principal shareholder and a failing manager. Julian placed the email chain on the desk between them. Explain this. Whitmore's face paled as he read. He began with the practiced language of bureaucracy, systems, human error, regrettable outcomes. Julian cut him off. You chose not to correct a known error that condemned a woman to death because it was cost prohibitive. You understand that is not an explanation. It is an indictment. He leaned forward, the IV line in his arm tugging slightly. You will file the correction with the insurer today. You will fast-track the approval. You will schedule the surgery for next week. And you will absorb every cost, including the family's ancillary expenses. Whitmore protested, citing board protocols liability. Julian's response was quiet and final. I am the board protocol you're worried about. Do this, or my next call is to the chair of the ethics committee and the lead investigative reporter at the Tribune. Your choice. The meeting ended. The machinery of the hospital, so slow to help, now jerked into frantic motion to protect itself. But Julian had made a critical miscalculation. He believed the problem was contained within those walls. He didn't account for the human heart and its capacity for suspicion when a miracle arrives unannounced. When a hospital social worker visited Alina's room that afternoon to announce that her insurance had been reevaluated and the surgery was approved with all costs covered, Alina didn't cry with joy, she froze. In her decade navigating the healthcare system on behalf of others, she had learned one iron law: systems do not spontaneously correct themselves. Why? She asked, her voice weak but sharp. What changed? The social worker, poorly briefed, offered a vague smile. Sometimes these things just work out. That was the wrong answer. Alina's mind, honed by survival, immediately went to the worst possibilities. An experimental drug trial they wanted her for. A mistake that would leave her with even greater debt. Or, perhaps most terrifying of all, that they had deemed her case hopeless and this was a palliative gesture. Her fear transferred directly to Ava. That evening when Ava came to visit, bursting with the news that a nice lady had bought all her drawings for $1,000, Alina's suspicion crystallized into dread. Someone was targeting her daughter. Who was she, Ava? What did she say? Ava, confused by her mother's fear, couldn't provide answers. The lady was just nice. She said the art was an investment. The word investment landed on Alina's ears like a threat. She made Ava promise not to go back to the stand. The next morning, for the first time in 16 days, the sidewalk outside Mercy General was empty. Julian saw the empty space from his window. He felt a jolt of panic entirely unrelated to his cardiac health. He called Maya. Find out why she's not there. Is her mother okay? Maya's report came back an hour later, gathered from a nurse on the floor. The mother was scared. She believed the sudden windfall was sinister. She'd forbidden Ava from returning. Julian stood at the window, staring at the vacant patch of concrete. His intervention, designed in the clean logic of capital, had crashed against the messy, scarred psychology of a family living in crisis. He had solved the financial equation but failed to solve the human one. He had become just another powerful, unseen force manipulating their lives, no different than the faceless insurance company. The realization was a profound humiliation. He had wanted to be the hero in the shadows. Instead, he was the new source of fear. He needed to change the vector. He needed to be seen. Cancel my discharge for tomorrow, he told his doctor, and get me a wheelchair. I'm going downstairs. The confrontation did not happen on the sidewalk, but in the third-floor family lounge, a room that smelled of stale coffee and worn-out hope. Julian had Maya arrange it, asking a nurse to tell Alina that a hospital benefactor wished to speak with her, hoping the formal title would compel her. Alina, propped in a wheelchair, faced him with the defiant exhaustion of a cornered animal. Ava stood beside her, holding her mother's hand, her eyes wide, recognizing the man from the window. Julian dismissed Maya, leaving the three of them in the quiet room. He spoke first, discarding all pretense. "Mrs. Martinez, my name is Julian Thorne. I'm a patient here, and I am the reason your insurance was approved. I'm also the person who bought your daughter's drawings." Alina's grip tightened on Ava's hand. "Why?" The question was a challenge. Julian took a breath, abandoning the script of a billionaire for the raw truth of a remorseful man. "Because I saw your daughter out my window every day. I saw her courage, and I learned that this hospital, an institution I have a stake in, failed you because of a clerical error they were too cheap to fix." He gestured to the folder on his lap. "I had the power to force them to correct it, so I did. The money for the drawings, the covered surgery, it's not a loan. It's not a trick. It is, very simply, the right thing that should have happened months ago, and I am sorry that my way of doing it frightened you." Ava, who had been listening with intense focus, tugged her mother's hand. "Mama, he's the window man." Alina looked from her daughter's face to Julian's. She saw not pity but a stark, uncomfortable shame. She saw the hospital gown. She saw the fatigue around his eyes that mirrored her own. The armor of her suspicion began to crack, not because she trusted him, but because she recognized the authenticity of his discomfort. "You have a stake in this hospital?" she asked. "Yes." "So you profited from the system that almost let me die?" It was not a question. Julian held her gaze. "Yes, I did." The brutal honesty of the admission hung in the air. It was the one thing a powerful man never admits. In admitting it, he became, for the first time, somewhat credible. Alina was silent for a full minute. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," Julian said. "But I would like your permission to help further, not from the shadows, transparently. Your daughter should be in school, not managing a medical fund. You should be resting, not afraid of your own cure." Ava looked up at Julian. "Are you a good guy?" she asked with devastating simplicity. Julian's voice caught. "I am trying very hard to become one, Ava." Alina studied him. She saw the risk but also the lifeline. Finally, she gave a single, slow nod. "We accept your help on one condition: no more secrets, everything out in the open." Julian agreed. But out in the open was a term he understood in a boardroom, not in the viral ecosystem of a sympathetic story. And he was about to learn the difference in the most public way imaginable. The first article appeared in the Metro section of the local paper 3 days later, a feel-good piece titled "Sidewalk Angel and the Secret Benefactor." It had been planted by the hospital's PR department, at Julian's direction, to control the narrative. They portrayed it as a heartwarming tale of community and a generous, anonymous donor. They left out the coding error. They left out the cover-up. They left out Julian Thorne's name. It was the version of truth that made everyone look good. And it went viral in under 6 hours. By that evening, national news outlets had picked it up. The image of Ava at her stand, the fairy tale element of a billionaire watching from above, it was a perfect algorithm of empathy. Art for Mama's Heart began trending. Donations to a generic hospital charity fund, mistakenly linked to the story, spiked by over $80,000. For a moment, it seemed the out-in-the-open plan was working. But the internet, once engaged, is a detective with infinite time and no boundaries. And the first crack appeared in the comments section of a popular news site. A user named Mercy Insider 92 posted a single, ominous question. If the donor is so anonymous, why is the hospital's PR team dictating the story? Something smells. Meanwhile, the machinery Julian had set in motion was grinding forward. Alina's surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday. She was moved to a private room. Specialists consulted. The atmosphere was one of pressurized efficiency, everyone aware of the watching world. Ava, true to Julian's word, was enrolled in a nearby elementary school with a full scholarship arranged for the coming year. For the first time in months, she had a backpack instead of a wagon, but the scrutiny was unnerving. Nurses asked for selfies. Orderlies whispered in the halls. They were no longer just patients, they were characters in a public drama. Alina felt it. The gratitude was real, but it was mixed with a pervasive sense of being owned by the narrative. Julian visited daily, often just sitting quietly, helping Ava with her new homework. An uneasy, practical alliance had formed. He was keeping his promise, no secrets between them. But he was learning a brutal lesson. The secret wasn't the problem. The system was, and the system was fighting back. Gerald Whitmore, the hospital administrator, was not a forgiving man. He had been humiliated and strong-armed. His internal investigation into the coding error, meant to be a whitewash, was being monitored by Julian's lawyers. Whitmore's career was in the balance, so he began a countermove. He couldn't attack Julian directly, but he could undermine the story's foundation, Alina's credibility. Through discreet channels, his team began suggesting to a few select reporters that Alina's employment history was complicated, that her previous insurance claims showed a pattern of escalation. It was a classic tactic: raise a shadow of doubt about the victim. The goal wasn't to prove anything. It was to muddy the waters, to turn a saintly narrative into a messy, ambiguous one. A business blog that covered Julian's tech empire was the first to bite, publishing an article titled "Billionaire's Charity or PR Salvage: Unanswered Questions in the Hospital Heart Story." It quoted anonymous hospital sources and asked why a man like Thorne would get so personally involved. It was the pivot from a human interest story to a business scandal. Julian saw the article on his tablet, his heart rate climbing in a way that had nothing to do with his recovery. This was the backlash he'd feared. But then came the revelation that changed the game entirely. His daughter, Sophia, called. She hadn't spoken to him in 7 years. Her voice on the line was cold, clear, and furious. "I saw the news. Is this your midlife crisis? Playing hero for the cameras to clean up your conscience?" Before he could answer, she delivered the blow. "A reporter called me. They're digging into you, Dad, into us. They're asking why your own daughter won't talk to you. They're asking about Mom. They're connecting dots to your old company's healthcare contracts. This isn't a story about a little girl anymore. It's a story about you, and they're going to burn you down to tell it." She hung up. Julian sat in the silence of his now empty penthouse apartment, discharged but not healed. The out in the open had become a floodlight, and it was illuminating every crack in his life. The worst was yet to come. The following day, Maya walked into his home office, her face ashen. She placed a legal notice on his desk. It was a subpoena, not for Julian, but for Alina Martinez. A medical malpractice attorney, famous for aggressive lawsuits, had taken notice of the viral story and the whispers about hospital error. He had contacted Alina directly, offering to represent her in a civil suit against Mercy General for pain, suffering, and negligence. The potential settlement could be in the millions. Alina, overwhelmed, had forwarded the email to Maya, asking, "Is this part of the help?" Julian felt the ground fall away. A lawsuit would trigger a formal discovery process. Every email, every record, including the damning, cost-prohibitive chain, would become public record. The hospital would be exposed, yes, but so would his own role. His investment, his board seat, his initial covert investigation. It would all be framed as a billionaire trying to contain a liability, not save a life. The narrative would permanently poison everything. The generous benefactor would become a calculating fixer. Ava's genuine struggle would become a legal pawn. He had wanted to fix a single error. Instead, he had lit a fuse on a powder keg of institutional corruption and personal ruin. He drove to the hospital immediately. He found Alina in her room, the attorney's letter printed in her lap. She looked terrified. "He says I have a right to sue, that what they did was wrong. Is it? Is this the right thing?" Julian had no clean answer. A lawsuit would bring justice, maybe. It would also bring years of trauma, depositions, and a relentless media circus that would engulf her and Ava. It would also likely cause the hospital to retaliate medically, dragging out her surgery with endless independent reviews. The right thing and the practical thing were at war. "Do you want to sue them, Alina?" he asked gently. She looked out the window where a local news van was now parked on the street. "I want the surgery. I want to take my daughter home. I don't want to be a story anymore." Her voice broke. "I just want to be invisible again." In that moment, Julian understood the true cost of his intervention. He had pulled one thread and the entire tapestry was unraveling. He had traded one kind of danger for another. He made a decision. Then we make it go away, all of it. I will handle the lawyer. You focus on getting better. But handling it required stepping back into the very shadows he'd promised to avoid. He called the malpractice attorney, a man named Robert Vance. Julian didn't offer a settlement. He offered something more valuable: information. He provided Vance with documented, anonymous leads on 3 other, more clear-cut cases of negligence at Mercy General, cases without the complication of a viral media story. Cases Vance could win easily and profit from hugely. The unspoken deal was clear. Drop the Martinez case and here's a better portfolio of targets. Vance, a pragmatist, agreed. The immediate legal threat to Alina dissolved. But the price was moral. Julian had used his knowledge and resources to divert legal attention, protecting the hospital he now despised in order to shield the family he was trying to help. He had become a manager of systemic corruption, not its destroyer. The victory felt like ash. And then the final cruel twist. As the public story began to cool, replaced by a new viral sensation, the internal mechanisms of the hospital completed their work. Alina was prepped for surgery. On the morning of the procedure, as she was being wheeled into the operating room, her cardiologist pulled Julian aside. His expression was grave. "We've done the final pre-op imaging, Mr. Thorne. The delay, it had consequences we didn't anticipate. The heart failure has progressed further than our models predicted. The success probability for the VAD implant has dropped from 90% to 65%. There's a significant risk she won't survive the surgery or that she'll suffer a major stroke on the table." Julian stared at him. "You're telling me now?" The progression was subtle. "We only see it in the latest scans." The doctor's tone was defensive. The earlier error didn't just deny her the surgery. It stole the time when the surgery would have been most effective. The cost of the cover-up was no longer just financial or emotional. It was quantifiable, medical. A 25% increase in the chance that Alina Martinez would die on the table. The clock they were racing against hadn't been paused by Julian's money. It had been ticking all along, louder and faster than anyone knew. He had to walk back to Alina's gurney, to look into Ava's trusting face, and decide whether to tell them that the miracle might be a death sentence. The clean, heroic arc was gone. All that was left was a terrible gamble, and the grim understanding that some wounds, inflicted by an indifferent system, run too deep for any one man's wealth to heal. Julian stood in the sterile hallway, the surgeon's words echoing in the silence of his own heartbeat. 65%, a number that felt both clinical and monstrous. He had 5 minutes before they would take Alina back. He walked to the pre-op bay where she lay, Ava curled carefully beside her on the gurney, avoiding the wires. Alina's eyes were closed, her face a mask of forced calm. She opened them when she felt his presence. "They're ready for me," she said, a statement, not a question. Julian knelt beside the bed, putting himself at eye level with both of them. He did not sugarcoat. He told her the number. He explained the delay's cost. He laid out the risk with the same brutal honesty he'd used in the family lounge. When he finished, Alina was silent for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "I already knew," she whispered. "In my body, I knew it was worse. I just didn't want to scare her." She looked at Ava, who was listening, her understanding dawning. "So what do we do, Mr. Thorne?" Julian had expected panic, tears, recrimination. Instead, he was being asked to join a council of war. "The surgeon believes it's still the best option, the only option. Without it, the timeline is very short." Alina nodded slowly. She turned to her daughter. "Ava, baby, Mama has to go fight really hard now, and I need you to be my brave girl. Can you do that?" Ava's chin trembled, but she set her jaw, a miniature of her mother's resolve. "I'll be brave. I'll draw you a new picture for when you wake up." Alina pulled her close, kissing her forehead. Then she looked at Julian. "I want you to take her, wait with her, don't leave her alone." It was the ultimate transfer of trust. Julian, the window man, was now the guardian. "I won't leave her side," he promised. The next 8 hours were the longest of Julian Thorne's life. He waited in a private family room with Ava, who drew picture after picture with ferocious concentration. She didn't cry. She drew sunflowers, hearts, and a detailed image of a doctor holding a giant glowing heart. She talked about her mother's favorite songs, about the park they used to visit, about how her mother could fix anything with a piece of tape and a smile. Julian listened, truly listened, for the first time in decades. He was not strategizing, he was not managing, he was simply present, holding space for a child's fear. He told her about his own daughter, Sophia, at that age. He showed her a picture on his phone, a rare, cherished one. Ava studied it and said she looked sad. The observation was a knife to his heart. She was, he admitted. I made her sad by not being there. Ava considered this, but you're here now. It was a simple, devastating absolution. In the operating room, the surgery was a grueling, minute-by-minute battle. The surgeon later reported that the damage was even more extensive than the scans showed. The faulty equipment of the human heart, neglected too long, had wrought complex havoc, but Alina Martinez's will was a tangible force. Twice, her vitals crashed. Twice, they brought her back. The team worked with a focused fury, perhaps aware of their own institution's role in bringing her to this precarious edge. At the 6-hour mark, the surgeon emerged, his scrub stained, his face etched with fatigue. He looked at Julian and Ava, who stood up, clutching her newest drawing. She made it through, he said. The device is in. It was difficult, she's not out of the woods. The next 24 hours in the ICU are critical, but she's alive. The surgery is complete. Julian felt his knees buckle with relief. Ava burst into tears, the brave facade finally crumbling. Julian picked her up, holding her as she sobbed into his shoulder. It was the first time he had held a child in over 20 years. Alina's recovery in the ICU was a roller coaster. Infections, blood pressure crashes, moments of hope followed by setbacks. Julian kept his promise. He was there every day. He navigated the medical updates, translated them for Ava, and became a fixed point in the chaos. The viral news story, having moved on to the next sensation, left them in a blessed, quieter bubble. But Julian was not finished. With Alina stabilized, he turned his attention to the source of the poison. He called a full emergency meeting of the hospital's parent corporation board. He did not send Maya. He went himself. And he did not bring lawyers. He brought Ava's drawings. He passed them around the polished mahogany table, 32 crayon visions of hope and fear. Then he played a voice recording, sent to him by Alina from her hospital bed, her voice weak but clear, describing the pain of the delay, the fear for her daughter, the feeling of being a line item. Then he presented the cost-prohibitive email chain. The room was silent. "This is not a negotiation," Julian said. "I am resigning from this board today, and I am divesting every share I hold in this corporation and any of its subsidiaries. But before I go, you will vote on 2 measures. First, a full, independent audit of every claim denial from the last 5 years with a public report. Second, the establishment of a patient advocacy fund, seeded with $20 million of my divested capital, to be managed by a board that includes patient families, not administrators." He looked at each of them. "You can vote yes and begin the process of earning back some shred of decency, or you can vote no, and I will take this entire packet to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Health tomorrow morning. Your choice." The measures passed unanimously. The personal reckonings were slower, messier, and more beautiful. Alina, after 3 weeks in the ICU and 2 months of inpatient rehab, was finally discharged. The ventricular assist device was a constant companion, a worrying reminder of fragility, but it was also a promise of time. She could walk. She could hold her daughter. She could breathe without the specter of immediate death. They moved into a modest, accessible ground-floor apartment, paid for by the trust Julian had established. Ava returned to school, a child again, her wagon retired for good. Julian's relationship with his daughter, Sophia, did not magically heal, but the door was cracked open. She had followed the story's conclusion, seen the footage of him walking Ava to school, read about his scorched earth exit from the hospital board. She called him, not with forgiveness, but with a question. "Why this time? Why did you stay?" He had no elegant answer. "Because she needed someone to stay, and I realized I needed to be the one who did." It was a start. He began therapy. He sold the empty penthouse and bought a smaller home with a garden, remembering Ava's drawings of sunflowers. The surprising detail came a year later, at the first anniversary fundraiser for the Patient Advocacy Fund, now named the Alina and Ava Foundation. Julian was speaking, outlining the fund's work, which had already helped over 50 families navigate denied claims. He finished to applause. Then, the foundation's director announced a new major donor. A tech foundation, run by Sophia Thorne, had pledged $1 million a year for 5 years. Julian, unaware, looked up to see his daughter walking onto the stage. She took the microphone. "I learned from my father that it's never too late to fix what you've broken," she said, looking at him, "even if it's just a piece at a time." They did not hug on stage, but they shared a nod, a recognition of a bridge being built, plank by plank. After the event, Alina found Julian in the garden. She walked without assistance, her strength returned. She handed him a small, framed drawing. It was one of Ava's originals from the sidewalk, the picture of the big green house with 4 windows. "She wanted you to have this," Alina said. "She said you helped us get our home back." Julian took it, the crayon waxed soft under the glass. "She gave me mine too," he said, his voice thick. The story that began with a child's impossible math on a cracked sidewalk did not end with a fairy tale merger of 2 families into one. It ended with something more real: 2 fractured families, healing separately but alongside each other, bound by a shared truth. That sometimes, salvation doesn't come from a single grand gesture, but from the painful, persistent choice to see someone, to stay, and to fight for them even when the spotlight fades. Julian Thorne did not become a saint. He became a man who finally understood the value of the $1 drawing and the incalculable worth of the hand that offers it. Ava's crayon drawings and Julian's billions existed in different worlds, but they converged on a single human truth: that the most powerful currency isn't money but attention. The choice to look, to truly see another person's struggle, and to let that seeing move you to action. This story, while fictional, is built upon a foundation of painful reality. Every day, families are forced to become fundraisers, auctioning their dignity to a system that values cost over care. We see it in the real 7-year-old selling lemonade for her own brain surgery, in the legacy of 4-year-old Alex Scott, whose lemonade stand sparked a $250 million fight against childhood cancer. We see it in the staggering fact that 1/3 of all money raised on platforms like GoFundMe is for medical expenses, because 41% of American adults carry medical debt. This is not a series of isolated tragedies. It is the symptom of a broken system. Yet within that breakage, we also find our shared humanity. The actor who secretly pays strangers' bills online. The stranger who drops a $100 bill in a child's donation box. The billionaire who realizes his wealth is worthless if it can't repair a single, preventable wrong. These are not solutions to the systemic failure, but they are lifelines. And sometimes, a lifeline is the difference between hope and despair. The story of Ava and Julian asks us a lingering question. In a world that often encourages us to look away, to scroll past, to deem problems too complex or too costly, what happens when we choose to look? When we choose to stay? You don't need $1 billion to pay attention. You don't need a viral story to be kind. You just need to believe that the one in front of you matters. That the single dollar, the offered hand, the moment of genuine listening, these are the quiet, revolutionary acts that rebuild worlds. If this story reminded you of the power of human connection, subscribe to our channel for more narratives that explore the depth of the human spirit. Tap like if you believe every act of seeing matters. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that they are not invisible. And in the comments below, tell us, when has a simple act of attention, given or received, changed the course of your day? We read every story and we are honored to share this space with you. Thank you for watching. May you always have the courage to see and the heart to stay.